Billionaire said I don't shake hands with staff. Moments later, Black woman pulled $5 billion invest. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. The air in the lobby of Thorn Investments was a currency in itself, chilled to a precise degree of expensive indifference. It smelled of polished marble, old leather, and the silent, overwhelming hum of capital moving through unseen digital rivers. People glided through this space, not walked. Their suits were armor, their smiles were scalpels, and their handshakes were contracts in waiting. Into this arena of calculated power stepped Dr. Alani Adebayo. She was an island of calm in a sea of controlled urgency. Her dress, a simple but elegantly tailored navy blue linen, did not scream for attention. Her shoes were practical, her jewelry minimal. In her hands, she carried not a sleek tablet or a designer briefcase, but a worn, soft-sided portfolio, its corners softened by years of use. Its color faded from a deep charcoal to a gentle gray. She was a handwritten letter in a world of frantic emails, and for that she was rendered utterly invisible. She stood near a towering fiddle-leaf fig, its waxy leaves looking as manufactured as everything else, and simply observed. She watched the junior analysts, their faces tight with ambition and caffeine, scurrying with binders. She saw the senior partners, their movements slow and deliberate, kings surveying their domain. They looked past her, through her, their eyes trained to recognize reflections of their own power, and finding none, they dismissed her from their reality. Her presence was a quiet question mark in a room full of bold-faced exclamation points. A young man, barely 30, with a sharp suit and an anxious energy, finally broke from the flow and approached her. His name was Julian Vance, a vice president whose primary role today was to be the designated greeter, a task he felt was beneath him but one he performed with practiced politeness. "Miss Adebayo?" he asked, the title a guess. She offered a small, serene smile. "Dr. Adebayo," she corrected, her voice soft but clear, holding a warmth that seemed out of place in the refrigerated air. "But Alani is fine." Julian's own smile flickered, a micro-expression of recalibration. The doctor title didn't quite fit the package he was seeing. University, maybe? A non-profit? He had been given a name, but no context, a detail that now felt like a clerical error, and an irritating one at that. "Of course, Dr. Adebayo. Right this way. Mr. Thorne is expecting to begin the meeting shortly." He gestured down a long, glass-walled corridor, his movements a little too sharp, a little too eager to move this anomaly along and get to the real business of the day. Alani followed, her pace unhurried. She was not intimidated by the grandeur or the implicit pressure. She was simply there to see. Julian Vance led Alani down the corridor, a path he internally referred to as the King's Walk. On either side, glass-walled offices showcased executives in their natural habitat, commanding, pointing, speaking into unseen headsets. The entire firm was a testament to the vision of one man, Marcus Thorne. His name was a legend in financial circles, a whisper of awe and fear. He didn't just invest in companies, he forged industries, broke them, and remade them in his own image. To get a meeting in his main conference room was to be granted an audience at the court of a modern-day emperor. As they reached the immense oak doors, Julian paused, turning to Alani with an expression of earnest, almost rehearsed gravity. "Just so you're aware," he began, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "Mr. Thorne values efficiency above all else. Brevity is appreciated." It was a well-intentioned warning, the kind one gives to a provincial cousin before introducing them to the Queen. He was trying to be helpful, trying to manage this person who seemed so profoundly out of her element. Alani simply nodded, her eyes offering nothing but calm attentiveness. "Thank you, Julian. I understand." Her lack of visible anxiety seemed to unnerve him more than any sign of nervousness would have. He pushed the heavy doors open, revealing the boardroom. It was a cathedral of commerce. A gargantuan slab of polished mahogany served as the table, surrounded by 24 high-backed leather chairs. A wall of windows overlooked the city, a sprawling kingdom far below. Seated around the table were the senior partners of the firm, a collection of men and a few women, who radiated a homogeneous aura of success and ruthless intelligence. They glanced up as Julian entered, their eyes flicking to the woman behind him. A brief collective assessment that registered, processed, and dismissed her in less than a second. They saw the simple dress, the worn portfolio, the quiet demeanor, and mentally filed her under assistant, note-taker, or specialized consultant's aide. Julian cleared his throat, feeling a sudden, inexplicable need to shield her from the predatory stillness of the room. "Everyone, this is Dr. Alani Adebayo." The name was met with a few polite, almost imperceptible nods before their attention drifted back to their phones and hushed conversations. They were waiting for the main event, the arrival of the sun around which their universe orbited. Alani took a seat not at the main table, but in one of the chairs set against the wall, a space typically reserved for junior associates or support staff. She placed her soft portfolio on her lap, her hands resting on it gently, as if protecting something precious. She didn't speak. She just waited. A model of patience that was, in its own way, a form of defiance. The energy in the room shifted palpably before he even entered. It was as if the air itself snapped to attention. Marcus Thorne appeared in the doorway, and a hush fell over the boardroom. He was not a physically imposing man, but he occupied a space far larger than his frame. Dressed in a flawlessly tailored suit of sharkskin gray, his silver hair was swept back, and his eyes, a piercing glacial blue, missed nothing. They were the eyes of a predator, constantly scanning for weakness or opportunity. He moved with an economy of motion, each step precise, each gesture conveying absolute authority. He offered a curt, sweeping nod to the room. "Gentlemen, ladies." His voice was gravelly, accustomed to being obeyed without the need to raise it. He went around the table, a brief handshake for his senior partners, a word here, a sharp question there. He was a general reviewing his troops before a battle. Julian, standing straighter, stepped forward at the opportune moment. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice a shade too high. "This is Dr. Alani Adebayo, who is here for the 10 o'clock. Marcus Thorne's gaze fell upon Alani for the first time. It was not a look of curiosity, but of swift, brutal categorization. He saw the chair against the wall. He saw the humble portfolio. He saw the unassuming woman, and his mind, a machine honed for ruthless efficiency, made its calculation. He turned back to Julian, extending his hand not to Alani, but to the young vice president for a firm, dismissive handshake. With his eyes still on Julian, but his words aimed like darts at the space Alani occupied, he spoke, his tone flat and final. "Julian, I don't shake hands with the staff." The words hung in the chilled air, sharp and glittering as shards of glass. A wave of profound awkwardness rippled through the room. A few partners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One cleared his throat. Julian's face flushed a deep, mortified crimson. It was a public rebuke, not just of the woman, but of his own judgment for presenting her as someone worthy of a handshake. Thorne had already moved on, his attention shifting to the agenda on the tablet before him. He gestured vaguely in Alani's direction without looking at her. "Just have her set up the presentation materials on the main screen, and we can get started." He had demoted her from a guest to a technician in a single, breath-stealing sentence. The silence that followed Thorne's pronouncement was not empty. It was dense and heavy, filled with Julian's frantic panic, the board's studied indifference, and Marcus Thorne's unassailable arrogance. All eyes, for a brief searing moment, were on Alani, waiting for her reaction. They expected a flicker of humiliation, a stammered correction, perhaps even a flash of anger. They expected her to shrink, to become even smaller in her designated corner of irrelevance. Alani did none of these things. Her posture remained unchanged. The serene, observant calm did not leave her face. There was a subtle shift, however, a gathering of focus so profound it was almost a physical force. She met Julian's horrified gaze and gave him the slightest, most reassuring of nods. A gesture that seemed to say, "It's all right, let it be." Then, with a grace that was utterly captivating in its simplicity, she rose from her chair. She did not move with the hurried deference of an assistant. She moved with the quiet purpose of someone who owned the very ground she walked on. She walked not to the audio-visual console at the side of the room, but directly to the head of the immense mahogany table, to the seat opposite Marcus Thorne, the seat reserved for the most important guest. The partners watched, their private conversation ceasing entirely. This was a deviation from the script, a violation of the unspoken caste system of the room. Alani placed her worn portfolio on the gleaming polished surface. The contrast was stark and beautiful, the humble, soft-sided case against the cold, hard symbol of corporate power. From it, she did not pull a laptop or a flash drive. She removed a single elegant fountain pen and one sheaf of thick, cream-colored paper, which she placed neatly in front of her. She took her seat. Thorne, who had been impatiently tapping his stylus against his tablet, looked up, an expression of sheer annoyance clouding his features. The woman was not following the simplest of instructions. "The screen," he said, his voice clipped, pointing his pen towards the massive black rectangle on the wall. "The presentation. Now." He spoke to her as one would speak to a malfunctioning appliance. Julian started to move forward, to intervene, to apologize for this spiraling misunderstanding. But Alani subtly raised a hand, a small gesture for him to remain where he was. She looked directly at Marcus Thorne, her gaze level and unwavering. For the first time, a hint of steel entered her soft voice. "There is no slideshow, Mr. Thorne. The presentation is here." She tapped a single finger on the papers in front of her, and then on her temple. "And here." A heavy sigh of theatrical impatience escaped Marcus Thorne. This was precisely the kind of time-wasting, unstructured nonsense he despised. He saw himself as a surgeon of capital, and this woman was bringing folksy remedies into his operating theater. "I don't have time for riddles, doctor," he said, infusing the title with a thick layer of condescension. "My firm manages over $80 billion in assets. My time is measured in millions per minute. Whatever it is you have to say it, clearly and quickly." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, a posture of absolute judgment. He was giving her the floor, but only as a means to expedite her inevitable failure and dismissal. The rest of the board took their cue from him, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to bored skepticism. Alani did not seem fazed by the overt hostility. She let the silence settle for a moment, allowing his words to evaporate in the vast, quiet room. Then, she began to speak. Her voice, no longer just soft, now carried a resonant authority that commanded attention. It was the voice of a teacher, a storyteller. "There once was a forest," she began, "that was judged only by the height of its tallest trees. Lumber companies would come, and they would measure the sequoias, the redwoods, the proud oaks that reached for the sun. They would calculate their value as timber, board feet, profit. And for a long time, this was how the forest's worth was known." The room was still. This was not a quarterly report. It was not a market analysis. The partners exchanged confused glances. Thorne tapped his fingers on the table, a rhythm of barely contained irritation. Julian, however, stood frozen by the door, utterly captivated. He saw the metaphor taking shape before the others did. Alani continued, her eyes scanning the faces around the table, making contact with each of them before returning to Thorne. But the lumber companies never looked down. They never considered the soil. They didn't study the mycelial networks, the vast, intricate web of fungi that connected every root, sharing nutrients, sending warnings, creating a foundation of such resilience that it allowed the entire forest to survive droughts, fires, and blights. They only saw the timber, the short-term gain. They never saw the true, enduring wealth of the forest, which was its interconnectedness, its quiet strength beneath the surface. She paused, letting the image fill the space. They could not see the system for the trees. Thorne scoffed, a short, sharp sound of derision. "A lovely story for a nature documentary, Dr. Adebayo. What does this have to do with my company?" He was done with metaphors. He wanted numbers, data, a point. A few of the partners, emboldened by their leader, chuckled softly. They were ready for the punchline, for this strange interlude to end. Alani's gaze remained fixed on Thorne, not with defiance, but with the patient focus of a diagnostician. "It has everything to do with your company, Mr. Thorne. Your firm is famous for its tallest trees. You find the soaring tech stocks, the high-yield acquisitions. You are excellent at calculating the value of the timber. But my question today is about the soil. What are you investing in that isn't measured in a quarterly report? Where is the resilience in your portfolio that will survive the fire next time? Not just the market correction, but the societal shift, the environmental crisis, the ethical reckoning." Her questions were quiet, but they landed like hammer blows. She was no longer a storyteller. She was an interrogator, using a scalpel of quiet inquiry. She turned her attention to the board. "You chase disruptive technologies, but do you invest in the communities those technologies disrupt? You fund brilliant minds, but do you examine the ethical framework in which those minds operate? You build skyscrapers of profit, but you ignore the ground they are built upon. This is a portfolio that is tall but not deep. It is a forest with shallow roots vulnerable to the first strong wind." Now the room was silent for a different reason. The skepticism was being replaced by a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. Alani was not there to present a product. She was there to conduct an audit, a moral audit. Julian watched, his heart pounding. He saw it now with perfect clarity. This wasn't an oversight by an assistant. This was a deliberate, meticulously planned encounter. Every detail, the simple dress, the worn portfolio, the quiet entry, was part of the strategy. She had wanted them to underestimate her. She had needed them to reveal their true nature, to show her the quality of their soil before she revealed the reason for her visit. The power dynamic in the room had begun a seismic shift, and only she and Julian seemed fully aware of the tremors. The tension in the room had become a tangible thing, thick and suffocating. Alani's words had stripped away the veneer of corporate jargon and left the raw philosophy of the firm exposed. Marcus Thorne's face, usually a mask of detached command, was now a thunderous canvas of fury. He had been challenged in his own sanctum, his entire life's work, questioned by this nobody. He slammed his hand flat on the mahogany table, the sound cracking through the silence like a gunshot. "Enough," he roared, his voice shaking with unconcealed rage. "This is absurd. You waltz in here with your fireside chats and your dime store philosophy, and you presume to lecture me on how I run my business. Who in God's name do you think you are?" He stood up, leaning over the table, his knuckles white. "Who sent you? Was it Sterling Cole? Vanguard? Are they trying to poach my people with this new age garbage? Give me a name. Who are you?" The direct, bellowed question was a demand for a simple answer, a box he could put her in, a hierarchy he could understand. He needed to know which of his rivals had sent this strange messenger. It was the only explanation his mind could conjure. Alani did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She let his anger wash over her, a wave crashing against a stone cliff. She held his furious gaze for a long moment, allowing the weight of his question to settle. The entire room held its breath. Julian felt a cold dread mix with a thrilling anticipation. The moment of revelation was here. Slowly, deliberately, Alani leaned forward. When she spoke, her voice was calm, precise, and carried the undeniable weight of truth. "My name," she said, enunciating each word with perfect clarity, "is Dr. Alani Adebayo, and I was sent by no one. I am the chair of the investment committee." She paused, then gently pushed the single sheaf of paper that had been sitting in front of her across the polished table. It slid to a stop directly in front of Julian Vance. Julian, compelled by an instinct he didn't understand, picked it up. His eyes scanned the first few lines of text. His jaw went slack. His face paled. He looked from the paper to Alani and back again, his mind struggling to connect two completely irreconcilable realities. He swallowed hard and read aloud, his voice trembling with the magnitude of what he was holding. "This is a formal letter of intent from the Lumina Foundation to divest its entire $5 billion endowment and seek new long-term fiduciary management." The words $5 billion detonated in the silent room. For a moment, there was only the sound of breathing, the collective sharp intake of air from 24 of the most powerful people in the city. 5 billion. It was a number so vast it was almost abstract. A career-defining, legacy-making sum. The Lumina Foundation wasn't just any fund. It was the unicorn of the financial world. Founded by a famously reclusive tech visionary, it was known for its immense size, its unwavering ethical charter, and its legendary patience. It invested in timelines of decades, not quarters. To manage the Lumina endowment was to be anointed, to be recognized not just as rich but as wise. Marcus Thorne froze, his rage dissolving into a state of pure, uncomprehending shock. He snatched the letter from Julian's trembling hands. His glacial blue eyes for the first time showed a flicker of panic as they raced across the page. The official letterhead, the embossed seal, the signature at the bottom. Dr. Alani Adebayo, Chair. His gaze lifted from the paper and fell upon the woman seated opposite him. He was not looking at a staffer, an assistant, a junior consultant. He was looking at the sole gatekeeper to one of the most respected and sought-after fortunes on the planet. He was looking at the personification of $5 billion. And he had told her he didn't shake hands with the staff. The brutal, crushing irony of the situation seemed to suck the very air from his lungs. Alani watched him, her expression not of triumph but of a sad, quiet confirmation. "My predecessor, Dr. Eris Thorne, admired your ambition from a distance," she said, her voice gentle again. "He was my mentor. And your uncle." This second revelation sent another shockwave through the room. Marcus looked as if he'd been struck. Eris Thorne, the estranged, academic brother his father had always disparaged as a soft-hearted failure, had been her mentor. "Before he passed, Eris told me that your firm was one of 3 potential candidates he was considering for the foundation's future. He believed that underneath the aggression, there might be a capacity for vision. My task was simple. It was not to hear a presentation. It was to see, to observe, to find out if this forest was more than just its tallest trees. She gestured around the room. I came here today to feel the quality of the soil. The boardroom, once Marcus Thorne's throne room, now felt like his tomb. The immense power he had cultivated over a lifetime had vanished in an instant, replaced by a chasm of his own making. The faces of his partners were a mixture of horror, pity, and a cold, calculating reassessment of their leader. They were seeing the fatal flaw in the man they had followed for years. Thorne finally crumpled back into his chair, the letter from the Lumina Foundation still clutched in his hand like a death sentence. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the ashen look of a man who has just watched his entire legacy burn to the ground because of a single thoughtless act of hubris. He looked at Alani, his expression pleading. "Dr. Adebayo," he began, his voice raspy, a ghost of its former command. I misunderstood. It was a mistake, a terrible, inexcusable mistake. Please," he fumbled for words. The master of the deal suddenly unable to negotiate his way out of a paper bag. He pushed himself to his feet again, this time not with authority, but with the desperate energy of a supplicant. He rounded the table and stood before her, his hand outstretched, a frantic, pleading offer. "Dr. Adebayo, Alani, please, allow me to apologize. Let us start again." The offered handshake, the very thing he had so casually denied her, now hung between them, a symbol of all he had just lost. Alani looked at his outstretched hand. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the dawning comprehension of his failure, but she also saw that it was a desperation born of loss, not of genuine change. He was not sorry for his prejudice, but for its cost. In a gesture of profound, quiet power, she did not take his hand. Instead, she brought her own hands together in front of her, and gave him a small, respectful bow of her head, a gesture of closure, not of engagement. "There is nothing to start again, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice filled with a sincere, almost sorrowful finality. "You have already given me my answer. Thank you for your time." With that, she placed her pen back in her portfolio, slid the worn case from the table, and stood up. She turned her back on the $5 billion crater she had left in the center of the room, and began to walk toward the door. The spell was broken. Julian, shaking off his stupor, scrambled to the massive oak doors and pulled them open for her, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated awe. He would have carried her out on his shoulders if he could. The senior partners of Thorne Investments watched her leave, their minds reeling. They had just witnessed a masterclass, not in finance, but in value. They had seen a titan fall, not to a market crash or a hostile takeover, but to a simple, devastating test of character he hadn't even known he was taking. The ripple effect had already begun. Alani Adebayo stepped out of the climate-controlled stillness of Thorne Investments and back into the warmth of the afternoon sun. The chaotic symphony of the city, the distant sirens, the rumble of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, felt real, alive and honest. She took a deep breath, not of relief, but of simple continuation. She had not come today to win a contract or to humiliate a man. She had come for the truth, and she had found it. Her victory was not in the chaos she left behind, but in the integrity she had refused to compromise. As she walked down the street, melting back into the anonymous flow of the crowd, she was once again just a woman in a simple dress, carrying a worn portfolio. But something was different, not in her but in the world she had just touched. Back in that boardroom, a seed of change had been planted. Julian Vance would never look at a person the same way again. He would forever search for the hidden depth beneath the surface. His definition of value, permanently rewritten. The other partners, having seen the fragility of their leader's judgment, would begin to ask the kinds of questions Alani had posed. Questions about foundations, about ethics, about the soil of their own investments. The fall of Marcus Thorne would become a cautionary tale, whispered in the halls of power, a story about a giant felled by his own shadow. Alani's journey was not about a single dramatic confrontation. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being underestimated, of having her worth measured by superficial metrics. It was the story of every woman, every person of color, every quiet soul, whose brilliance is housed in a package the world is not trained to recognize. Her power was not in the $5 billion she controlled. That was merely a tool. Her true power was in her unshakable sense of self-worth, a fortress built brick by brick through years of quiet determination and unlauded excellence. She had learned long ago that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need a fancy suit or a booming voice. It simply needs to be, to hold its ground, to know its own value even when the world is blind to it. And now she moves on to the next candidate. The next boardroom, carrying with her the quiet, persistent question, is the forest strong enough? How often do we walk through our own lives acting as Marcus Thorne? We make snap judgments based on clothing, on speech, on a job title, or the lack thereof. We build hierarchies in our minds and sort people into boxes, assigning them value based on our own limited, often biased criteria. We scan the room for the tallest trees, for the people whose power and influence are immediately obvious, and in doing so, we become blind. We fail to see the vast, intricate network of strength, wisdom, and potential that lies just beneath the surface. We overlook the quiet, unassuming person in the corner who may hold the key, the answer, the very opportunity we are seeking. True worth is rarely loud. True genius is often humble. Profound strength frequently comes wrapped in a simple package. Dr. Alani Adebayo is more than a character in a story. She is a reminder. She represents the hidden potential that exists all around us, and perhaps even within us. The world may try to label you, to put you in a chair against the wall, to judge your portfolio by its worn cover. It may refuse to shake your hand, but your value is not determined by their assessment. It is determined by the depth of your character, the strength of your integrity, and the resilience of your spirit. The most important presentation you will ever give is not on a screen, but in how you carry yourself in the face of dismissal. So today, look for the quiet ones. Listen to the soft voices. Challenge your own assumptions. And in your own life, when the world tries to tell you who you are, have the courage to calmly and quietly show them the truth. For the richest soil is often the most overlooked, and the most powerful force on earth is a soul that knows its own unshakable worth.